They tried to fine me $500 a day for keeping a few boxes of honeybees in my own backyard. They threatened to take my home over it. So I packed up 60,000 stinging accomplices and brought them straight to the HOA boardroom. This is my story. My wife, Claire, died on a Tuesday in November. By the following spring, the silence in our house had become a physical weight, pressing against my chest every time I walked through the front door. I needed noise. I needed life. I didn't get a dog, and I didn't start playing the radio in empty rooms. Instead, I built 3 wooden boxes, painted them a soft, weathered white, and set them up behind the tall cedar fence in my backyard. I bought the bees from a guy 2 towns over, 3 nucleus colonies. Bees don't care about your grief. They don't offer pity. They have a job to do, and they do it with a frantic, singular focus that I found deeply grounding. When I opened the hives on a warm afternoon, the smell of pine smoke from my smoker, mixed with the scent of warm wax, propolis, and curing honey, the hum they made wasn't music. It was a low, vibrating engine of survival. Sitting on an overturned bucket, just watching them funnel into the hive entrances, their back legs heavy with yellow pollen, I could almost breathe again. But I lived in Oakwood Terrace. Oakwood Terrace was less a neighborhood and more a suburban penal colony, run by people whose greatest achievement in life was enforcing a specific shade of beige on exterior trim. The grass here was mandated to be kept between 2 and 3 inches. Trash cans were to be out no earlier than 6 p.m. the night before pickup and hidden from public view by 8 a.m. the following morning. I knew the rules when Claire and I bought the place. We thought they were a necessary evil to keep property values up. We didn't realize we were funding our own surveillance state. The dictator of our particular beige fiefdom was Jasmine Vance. No, let's call her Jasmine Hayes. Jasmine was a retired mid-level manager who approached the Oakwood Terrace Homeowners Association presidency with the zeal of a wartime general. She drove a pristine silver Lexus, carried a clipboard on her evening walks, and had once fined a man 3 streets over because his children left a plastic tricycle on the porch for 4 hours. My bees were quiet. They were tucked away behind a 6-foot privacy fence. They bothered no one. In fact, for the first 2 months, my neighbor's gardens had never looked better. Tom, the retired mechanic next door, actually leaned over the fence one afternoon to tell me his tomato plants were exploding with fruit. Then came the first letter. It arrived on heavy stock paper, slipped into my mailbox like a quiet threat. Dear Mr. Miller, it read, "It has come to the attention of the Oakwood Terrace HOA board that you are keeping unauthorized livestock, reference Bylaw 4B, Section 12, on your property. Agricultural animals are strictly prohibited. You have 48 hours to remove the aforementioned livestock, after which you will be assessed a fine of $500 per day until compliance is met." I stared at the paper. Livestock. They were calling insects livestock. I didn't panic immediately. I figured it was a misunderstanding. People are afraid of what they don't understand, and most people don't understand bees. They think of hornets. They think of yellow jackets ruining a barbecue. They don't think of gentle Italian honeybees minding their own business. I put on a clean shirt, walked 4 blocks down the perfectly paved sidewalk, and rang Jasmine Hayes' doorbell. She opened the door, wearing a pale pink twin set, and a look of practiced, polite disdain. Behind her, her foyer looked like it hadn't been lived in. It looked like a furniture showroom. "Lucas," she said. Her voice was thin. "If this is about the citation, you need to submit your grievances in writing to the board." "Jasmine, they're not livestock," I said, trying to keep my voice even, friendly. "They're pollinators. They're bugs. By your definition, anyone with a birdhouse or an anthill is keeping livestock." She crossed her arms. "We have received complaints, Lucas. The buzzing, the swarm risk. We simply cannot have agricultural operations in a residential zone. It brings down the tone of the neighborhood." "Complaints from who? Tom next door loves them. They're behind a 6-foot fence. You can't even see them." "The rules are the rules," Jasmine said. She reached out and casually adjusted a ceramic pot on her porch railing, ensuring it was perfectly centered. 48 hours. Or the fines begin. I suggest you call an exterminator. She shut the door. I stood on her porch for a long time. My jaw was clenched so tight my teeth ached. Call an exterminator. She wanted me to poison the one thing in my life that was actively thriving. She wanted me to kill 60,000 creatures because they didn't fit into her sterile beige vision of the world. I walked home. I went into the backyard. The afternoon sun was slanting through the oak trees, hitting the white boxes. The girls were working. A steady stream of them launching into the air, banking left over my roof, heading out to find nectar. I sat down on my bucket. I wasn't going to call an exterminator, and I wasn't going to move them. 2 days later, the second letter arrived. Notice of fine assessment, $500. I threw it in the trash. The next day, another envelope. Another $500. Then, another. Within a week, I owed the Oakwood Terrace HOA $3,500. By the end of the month, the total sat at $15,000. The letters changed tone. They stopped being polite notices and turned into legal threats. The board hired a lawyer. A thick envelope arrived via certified mail, demanding immediate payment and stating that if the balance was not settled within 30 days, the HOA would place a lien on my house. They were going to steal my home over bugs. The pressure was suffocating. I stopped sleeping. I lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, doing the math in my head. I was a high school history teacher. I didn't have 15 grand lying around, let alone the tens of thousands more it would take to fight them in a prolonged court battle. Tom, my neighbor, caught me by the fence one afternoon. He looked nervous. "Dave," he said quietly, looking over his shoulder toward the street. "Jasmine came by. She was asking if I'd sign a sworn statement saying your bees were a nuisance, that they kept me from enjoying my property." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell her?" "I told her to kick rocks," Tom snorted. "Told her I haven't bought store-bought tomatoes in a month because your girls are working my garden overtime. But Dave, she's going door to door. She's trying to build a paper trail. You gotta be careful. These people, they don't have anything else going on in their lives. This is their Super Bowl." He was right. I was fighting a war of attrition against people with infinite free time and a shared bank account funded by my own dues. I needed a weapon. That Friday night, I dragged a heavy cardboard box down from the attic. Inside was every piece of paperwork Claire and I had signed when we bought the house. At the very bottom, beneath the mortgage agreements and the title insurance, was the Oakwood Terrace covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC and Rs. It was 140 pages of dense, mind-numbing legalese. It dictated the exact approved colors for front doors, 7 variations of brown, 3 of gray, 1 specific muted blue. It dictated the acceptable weight of domestic pets, under 40 pounds. I made a pot of black coffee and sat at the kitchen table. I read every single page. I read it until the words blurred together. I was looking for a technicality. If Jasmine wanted to play by the rules, I was going to find a rule she hadn't anticipated. At 3 a.m., my eyes bloodshot and my head pounding, I found it. Section 8, Article 4, Dispute Resolution and Physical Evidence. It was a deeply buried clause, probably copied and pasted from some generic template the developer's lawyers used 20 years ago. It stated, in the event of a dispute regarding an alleged physical violation on a property, including but not limited to unauthorized materials, architectural deviations, or restricted items, the homeowner reserves the right to present said physical items to the board of directors in person during an open, scheduled administrative hearing for physical inspection and final assessment before any lien can be legally executed. I read it again, and then I read it a third time. Present said physical items to the board of directors in person. They wanted to assess my livestock. They wanted to inspect the restricted items. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 p.m. It was an open administrative hearing held in the rented conference room of a local community center. The agenda had been emailed out to the neighborhood. Item number 4 was Approval of line execution, Miller property. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't draft a pleading letter. Instead, I spent the weekend preparing my equipment. Moving a beehive is not a casual undertaking. You can't just pick it up and walk away. A full hive can weigh over 100 pounds. It is entirely composed of living, vibrating, highly defensive creatures who do not appreciate being jostled. You have to do it at night. When the sun goes down, all the foragers return to the hive. Once it's dark, you seal the entrance. On Wednesday night, I went out into the dark with a roll of heavy-duty wire mesh and a staple gun. The air was cool. I wore my full suit, the veil, the thick gloves. I worked quietly, stapling the mesh over the entrances of all 3 hives. The bees were locked in. They were confused, but the mesh allowed them to breathe. Then I used ratchet straps. I wrapped 2 heavy-duty straps around each hive, ratcheting them down tight so the bottom board, the deep brood boxes, and the lid were fused into a single, immovable block of wood. I backed my old Ford pickup truck onto the lawn. I didn't care about the tire tracks on the grass. It took me 3 hours to heave all 3 hives into the bed of the truck. By the time I finished, my back was screaming and my shirt was soaked in sweat. I tied them down securely against the cab. I stood in the driveway looking at the cargo in my truck bed. Inside those boxes were 60,000 bees. They were getting agitated. Even through the wood, I could hear the collective hum of them, a low, angry vibration that sounded like a generator running in the distance. They were locked in securely. As long as the ratchet straps held and the mesh stayed stapled, they were perfectly contained, completely safe. But to anyone who didn't know beekeeping, 3 buzzing, vibrating boxes of insects looked like a weapon of mass destruction. I went inside, took a shower, and laid out my best suit. Tomorrow, Jasmine Hayes and the Oakwood Terrace HOA board were going to get exactly what they asked for. I was going to present my physical evidence directly to the boardroom. The Oakwood Terrace Community Center smelled of indoor pool chlorine and decades of floor wax. The HOA board meetings were always held in Room B, a windowless cinder block square with fluorescent lights that buzzed with a sick, flickering energy. I parked my truck in the loading zone by the side doors at 6:45 p.m. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the asphalt. I walked around to the tailgate. The sound was immediate, a low, furious thrumming. The girls were awake, and they were incredibly angry. Honeybees regulate the temperature of their hive by vibrating their flight muscles. Confined behind the wire mesh, the collective heat radiating from the 3 wooden towers was palpable. I pressed my palm against the side of the bottom brood box. The wood was physically vibrating, like a living heart. I had borrowed a heavy-duty, 4-wheeled flatbed cart from the high school custodial staff. I lowered the tailgate, positioned the cart, and began the agonizing process of sliding the strapped hives onto the flatbed. It took 15 minutes of sweating, grunting, and carefully applied leverage. When they were finally loaded, the 3 hives stood like blocky, whitewashed monoliths. I pushed through the double side doors. The rubber wheels of the cart squeaked sharply against the linoleum, but that sound was quickly swallowed by the deep, resonant drone coming from the cargo. I rolled the cart down the hallway. Up ahead, the door to Room B was propped open with a rubber wedge. I could hear Jasmine Hayes' voice echoing down the corridor. She was mid-lecture. And furthermore, the continued presence of unapproved holiday decorations past January 15th is not just an eyesore. It is a direct violation of community standards. We will be issuing a second warning to the property on Elm. I pushed the cart through the doorway. The cart's wheels hit the metal threshold with a loud clack. The room went dead silent. There were about 12 people in the room. 5 board members sat behind a long folding table at the front. 7 residents sat in metal folding chairs in the audience section, here to dispute a fence height or beg for permission to paint a shutter. Jasmine sat dead center at the folding table, a gavel resting near her perfectly manicured hands. To her right was Greg, a guy in his 50s who wore his Bluetooth earpiece like a badge of office. To her left was Linda, the secretary, whose pen was hovering over her legal pad. Every eye in the room locked onto me. Then they locked onto the 3 massive wooden boxes I was pushing. The drone in the enclosed room was suddenly terrifying. Without the open air to dissipate it, the hum of 60,000 agitated bees reverberated off the cinder block walls. It sounded like an electrical transformer about to blow. It was a deep, primal sound that hit you right in the base of your spine. "Lucas," Jasmine said. Her voice wavered, losing its practiced corporate authority. She stood up slowly. "What on earth are you doing? You can't bring construction materials in here." I wheeled the cart right down the center aisle, pushing it until it was exactly 6 feet away from the board's folding table. I'd locked the caster wheels with the toe of my boot. "They aren't construction materials, Jasmine," I said. My voice was calm. It felt good to speak calmly. I hadn't felt calm in 6 months. "This is my livestock." Greg pushed his chair back. The metal legs screeched against the floor. Are there bees in there?" "Roughly 60,000, I said. I patted the top of the nearest hive. The hum instantly spiked in volume, an angry, defensive roar that made Linda gasp and drop her pen. "Are you insane?" Jasmine shrieked. Her pale pink twin set suddenly looked ridiculous against the sheer panic flushing her neck charade. "Get those things out of here. Now, this is a public building." "I can't do that, Jasmine." I reached into my back pocket, pulled out the thick, dog-eared stack of the Oakwood Terrace CC and Rs, and tossed it onto their folding table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the top edge of my hive. Section 8, Article 4. Dispute Resolution and Physical Evidence. A homeowner facing a lien has the right to present the physical items of violation to the Board of Directors in person during an open administrative hearing for physical inspection and final assessment. I gestured broadly to the 3 vibrating boxes. "You wanted to assess my agricultural operation. You wanted to place a lien on my home over these boxes, so I brought them for your inspection. Go ahead, inspect." Nobody moved. The 7 residents in the audience had quietly stood up and pressed their backs against the far wall near the door. "You're out of your mind," Greg stammered, his eyes darting to the wire mesh stapled over the entrances where hundreds of bees were crawling over each other, trying to find a way out. "This is a biohazard. This is terrorism." "It's a loophole," I corrected him. "You folks love rules. You love bylaws and clauses. You weaponize them to make people miserable. Well, I'm just following the rules you wrote. You want to take my house? Fine. But first you have to formally inspect my livestock." I reached out and placed my fingers on the heavy-duty ratchet strap binding the closest hive. I didn't pull the release lever. I just rested my hand there. "Because if you don't want to inspect them," I said softly, the hum of the bees underscoring every word, "I'm going to have to open them up so you can get a better look." The silence in the room, beneath the angry drone of the hives, was absolute. The air felt thick, heavy with the suffocating bureaucracy that usually ruled this space, now completely overridden by raw, biological panic. "You wouldn't," Jasmine whispered. Her eyes were fixed on my hand resting on the metal ratchet. "You'll be arrested. You'll go to jail." "For what?" I asked. "Having an accident? These straps tricky. Sometimes they just slip. And let me tell you something about honeybees, Jasmine. They don't like being locked up. They don't like the vibration of a truck bed. Right now they are confused, hot, and highly defensive. If this strap slips and those boxes tumble, they won't just fly around. They will flood this room in a matter of seconds. They will cover the lights. They will cover the walls. And they will cover anyone who moves too fast." Linda let out a small, terrified whimpering sound. She was inching her chair backward, millimeter by millimeter. "Call the police, Greg," Jasmine commanded, though she didn't take her eyes off me. "Call 911. Greg fumbled for his phone, his hand shaking so badly he dropped it onto the table. What do I tell them? That a guy brought boxes to a meeting? Tell them I'm following HOA bylaws," I offered. "But frankly, Greg, The cops aren't going to touch this. They don't have bee suits. By the time they figure out what to do, or call a beekeeper from 3 counties over to defuse the situation, we'll all be sitting in this room for a very, very long time. Just you, me, and the girls. I stepped away from the cart, leaving my hand off the strap, but standing close enough to guard it. I looked at the board members. Really looked at them. They were just people. Sad, small people who derive their only sense of control by policing the exact height of their neighbor's grass. My wife died in November, I said. The words hung in the air. Jasmine blinked, momentarily thrown off her script. I didn't care about the lawn, I continued, my voice dropping lower, cutting through the hum. I didn't care about the trash cans. I didn't care about living in a house that felt like a tomb. These bees, they kept me breathing. They gave me a reason to walk outside and look at the sun. They didn't hurt anyone. They stayed behind a fence. They minded their own business. But you couldn't let it go. You had to have control. I looked directly at Jasmine. She looked pale. The fluorescent light made the lines around her mouth look deep and bitter. You threatened to steal my home, I said, my voice hardening. The home where I lived with Claire. You threatened to take it over a technicality, because you wanted to feel powerful. So here is your power, Jasmine. Use it. Inspect the livestock. Uphold the fine. Or, I reached inside my jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the folding table, right over Jasmine's carefully typed agenda. Or, you sign that. Jasmine stared at the paper, as if it were coated in poison. What is this? It's a motion to dismiss, I said. It formally waives the $15,000 in fines. It permanently revokes the threat of a lien. And it grants a permanent, irrevocable variance for 3 beehives at my address, classifying them as domestic pets, not agricultural livestock. Under 40 pounds per box. They fit the weight limit perfectly. Greg stared at me. You want us to rewrite the CC&Rs right now? We can't do that. It requires a neighborhood vote. I placed my hand back on the ratchet strap. The metal clicked loudly. You're the executive board, I said. You grant variances for sheds and fences all the time without a vote. You have the authority, and you have a quorum right here. The bees surged in volume, as if on cue, a deep, resonant rumble of thousands of wings beating against the wood. Linda broke first. Just sign it, Jasmine, she cried out, tears welling in her eyes. I'm severely allergic. Please just sign the damn paper. Jasmine looked at Linda. Then at Greg, who was violently nodding in agreement. She looked at the audience members by the door, none of whom were making a move to intervene. Finally, she looked at the towering wooden boxes, listening to the furious life contained within them. The general was defeated. Jasmine picked up her pen. Her hand was shaking. She signed the bottom of the page. She pushed it to Greg, who signed it so fast, he nearly tore the paper. Linda didn't even read it. She just scribbled her name and immediately stood up, backing toward the wall. I picked up the paper, blew on the ink, and folded it neatly, tucking it into my jacket pocket. Thank you, I said. I consider this matter closed. The physical inspection is complete. I unlocked the caster wheels of the cart. Grabbing the handle, I slowly rotated the massive load. The wheels squeaked against the linoleum once more. I pushed the cart back up the center aisle, through the doorway, and down the long, hollow corridor of the community center. Nobody spoke a word as I left. The drive home was quiet. The night air had cooled, and the bees had settled slightly, though the hum was still a steady vibration against the cab of my truck. When I finally got them back into the yard, placed carefully on their cinder block stands, the moon was high and bright. I undid the ratchet straps, the heavy canvas snapping loose in the dark. With a pair of pliers, I carefully pried the staples out of the wire mesh. As I pulled the mesh away from the first entrance, a few dozen guard bees spilled out into the cool night air. They were agitated, crawling rapidly over the wood. But they didn't fly. They just clustered around the entrance, fanning their wings, cooling the hive, re-establishing their perimeter. I sat down on my overturned bucket. The smell of pine smoke wasn't there, just the scent of warm wax and the damp earth of my backyard. I watched them in the moonlight. They were safe. The house was safe. For the first time since November, I sat in the dark, and I didn't feel the crushing weight of the silence. I just listened to the hum. Sometimes, fighting back doesn't mean playing by their rules. It means forcing them to look their own absurdity in the face. If you enjoyed this story of a homeowner taking the ultimate stinging revenge on a tyrannical HOA, hit that like button and share it with anyone who's ever dealt with neighborhood bureaucracy. Don't forget to subscribe for more grounded real-life stories of petty revenge and standing your ground. Drop a comment below. What's the craziest HOA rule you've ever faced?